Okay, so today's case is insane. Like, literally insane. It went from being such a small murder case that should have been, like, wrapped up in, like, days, into this huge case that led to catching an international criminal, who was on Interpol's most wanted list. He had several personalities as well. This man had gold bars stashed inside of his house. He had paintings that were worth like thousands of dollars. He was like, this was a very smart man. And like, he almost got away with it in this one little murder case. Completely blew up and he was caught. So this case is jam-packed with almost like everything crimey. There's like incest, there's like murder, there's theft, there's identity theft, there's like, it's insane. Like, this case is literally jam-packed with crimes. Sorry. So yeah, I was watching the documentary on this, and I'll link it down below in case anybody's interested. But yeah, this case is like insane to me. So that's the case we're going to be doing today, and I will start talking about it now. Okay, so on July 28th, 1996, two fishermen were getting ready to start work, and their first haul was kind of disappointing. So they moved to an area which was 6 miles away, where people barely fish. So as it was known as the Roughs, and nobody ever fished there. So they went there, and they threw down their fishing nets, and after an hour they bring in their fishing net, and what they find is horrific. They find a dead man's body falling out of the net among the fish, and the discovery of this dead man's body would be the start of a very big case involving an international con man with a string of false identities. The police first thought that it was a tragic accident, because the body was in a very good condition for being found in salt water. The dead man was dressed in a long sleeve with trousers, brown shoes, and he had absolutely no identification. But he was wearing a Rolex, and the Rolex had the time and the date saved on it, and the date that was on the Rolex was the 22nd, so they knew what time this man fell into the water. His pockets were turned out, like someone had searched them. They thought they could have, he thought that the theory was that this man might have fell off a boat or something, but no one was reported missing at the time, and also the body was very well preserved, so investigators thought the body couldn't have been there for so long, or else it would have decayed a little bit more. So yeah, but in the post-mortem, there was revealed that there was several injuries on the man's body, including one very big, deep gash on his head, and there was a large possibility that he could have gotten this gash when the fishermen were pulling him up in the net, so they don't know if this was still a murder case or if the man just fell off the boat. But there was one distinguishing mark found on the dead man's body, something they could use to identify him. It was a very odd-shaped tattoo on the back of his right hand, so it was like right here. And it was a cluster of stars, but it was very hard to know. It looked like a cluster of stars. So with Rolex watches, they have serial numbers on them, and these serial numbers can be used to track where the watch came from. And when they came into contact with the Rolex, they found that they came into contact with Rolex. They gave Rolex the serial number on the watch, and they learned that the dead man's body belonged to a Mr. Ronald Joseph Platt. Ronald Joseph Platt, and I'm going to be referring to him as Ron Platt. So thanks to the Rolex, they found out who this man was. or else this case would have went cold. So that was number one. The first thing that was kind of like a coincidence, and it led to this big thing happening. They found out who this was, and they tracked down his last known address. It was a place in Essex, and this was where Ronald lived, and he lived in a little house. They called the landlord of the house, and the landlord's name was Mr. D. David, with Davis, which is also David Davis. So Mr. David Davis. I'm going to put his picture on the screen. Hopefully I don't forget that in editing. Yeah. So they called the landlord of this house, and they expected some sort of reaction from the landlord, like, your tenant is dead, and like, come on, like, show a little bit of reaction. But he seemed pretty chill about it, and he didn't ask many questions. So the landlord agreed to meet with the police to give them some background information on Ronald Platt, the dead man. So David Davis was very nice. He dressed well. His clothing seemed to be quite expensive. He was very self-assured, and he was a confident man who basically entered into the interview room with a lot of confidence. He knew what he was doing. He told investigators that the tattoo on the back of Ron Platt's hand was actually the Canadian maple leaf. He also told them that he would send them a picture of Ron that he had. And he sent them a picture of Ron standing next to another man in a big field, and there was also a horse in the picture, so he sent them a picture of Ron that he had. So investigators at this point still thought and heavily believed in the theory that Ron Platt had just fallen off the boat and drowned, but they still needed some more background information before they could close the case completely. Just uncover a few unknown details. One investigator wanted to call Mr. David Davis again. So after a while, they wanted to call Mr. David Davis again to get some more information on everything. But Mr. David Davis, I'm going to call him David wasn't answering the phone. So the investigator sent one of his colleagues to tell Mr. David to contact the investigators. So this colleague went to the address that was given to him by David. So the colleague goes to the address, and he finds that there are 4 houses there, and it's a very small little neighborhood. It was in a very big field. And there wasn't any numbers on it. So this colleague, he decides to go around and knock on each door until he finds David. And the first house that he knocked on, an elderly couple actually answered the door, and he said to them hey, I'm looking for a little London farmhouse. And this was the house that Mr. David Davis lived in, a little London farmhouse. And the couple said, no, this is not Little London Farmhouse. This is Little London House. And they said, if you're looking for a Little London Farmhouse, it is right next door. They also asked him, why are you asking for a Little London Farmhouse, And, who are you looking for? And the colleague was I'm looking for David Davis. He lives in Little London Farmhouse. And this elderly couple replied in, shock and confusion, because they had never known a David Davis. They had only known a Ron Platt. So, what the colleague had learned that day was that Mr. David Davis was pretending to be Ron Platt. Ron Platt is dead. Mr. David Davis is pretending to be him and lives in this little cottage area, place area. So this is what the colleague learns. After the colleague learns this, the investigators are very confused. So they decide to dig deeper into the case. They were there's more to this. There's something very suspicious going on. So they look into the case a little more. Little did they know this was the start of an extraordinary investigation that would take them 3,000 miles across the Atlantic and 2 years of painstaking detective work to solve the mystery of Ron Platt's death. So, this colleague decided to go and interview all of the neighbors of David Davis, who was pretending to be Ron Platt. The first couple was Frank and Audrey, and it was the elderly couple. So they said that they recently moved in and they didn't know. And then they interviewed another neighbor, and one of the neighbors told the colleague that if Ron Platt was found, like, fallen off a boat and drowned, there was probably a connection between David Davis and Ron Platt's death, because David Davis, which they knew as Ron Platt, he had owned a boat, so there could have been a connection there, but that's not enough evidence. You can't blame someone for somebody's murder just because they have a boat. If you could, they probably would have arrested millions of people that day, but that's not the way it works. So many witnesses were starting to be interviewed. They were looking for any small little details, anything to help them solve the case. And the first witness that they interviewed was the fishermen, the ones that found the dead body and hauled it up to the boat and, found it. The fisherman, one of the fishermen told the investigators that there was also a fishing net. There was also an anchor found in the fishing net that he pulled up with the dead man's body. And he said that he actually kept that anchor, but he gave it to a friend. And then they traced that friend, but then the friend told them that he didn't have the anchor anymore because he gave it to his mother to sell in a car boot sale in Brixham. But the anchor had never actually gotten sold, and it was still in his mother's garage. So they took the anchor, and little did they know, this anchor, this thing that was probably should have been a small piece of evidence, would be such a significant piece in solving this case. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So they wanted to learn more about the friendship between David Davis and Ron Platt. They wanted to learn more about the relationship between them. So they interviewed Ron Platt's brother, who told them that Ron had a long-standing ex-girlfriend named Elaine Boyce. So we're talking about the actual Ron Platt, the dead man that was found. He had an ex-girlfriend named Elaine Boyce. Elaine was interviewed, and they learned a lot more about Ron Platt and how he lived his life, etc. So Ron and Elaine actually lived together for 10 years until 1993, and she said that Ron was very quiet and calm and gentle. He was a lovely, warm man. She had photos of Ron wearing his Rolex, and she said that the Rolex was his prized possession and that he was fascinated with electronics, precision engineering. He wore it in the shower. He loved this Rolex so much. And when she learned that he died, she said she felt lost. She couldn't believe it. They asked about David Davis and learned more about the connection the two had. So you gotta understand, these two kind of split in 1993, and Ron was found dead in 1995. That's 2 years. So, and they were together for 10 years, so finding this out was probably very heartbreaking for her. Yeah. But Elaine said that she had actually, when they asked her about the connection between David Davis and Ron Platt, she said that they had a very close connection. All three of them had a very close connection. So now we dive into the story between Elaine Boyce, David Davis, and Ron Platt, and how everything kind of went down. So Elaine said that she had met David Davis 5 years before. She said David walked into a fine art auctioneer's where Elaine worked as a receptionist. She said that she remembered that day had been very quiet. No one really called in, no one really checked in, and it was very quiet, and David stood by her table for an hour and a half, and he talked to her about the auction room and the paintings and the antiques and all of it. And she said that David was very tall. He was broad, charming, engaging, and almost a perfect man. He told her he was looking for a place to stay nearby. At the end of the convo that the two had, David offered Elaine a job, but she knew she couldn't work for him because, her and Ron were planning to go off to Canada, so she didn't know if she could take the job because, she was planning to go to Canada soon with Ron. But David still hired her, and he told her he would pay her more and she could save up money for her trip, and so she took the job. Instantly, David Davis became friends with the couple, and especially Ron and David Davis, they became friends in an instant. Like within minutes of talking, they were like very close, instant connection, you know? David even offered them a share in his company, Cavendish Corporation. He made them directors of his company. So yeah, he told them that he did this because he didn't want to be a director for the company, because he didn't want to have his name over too much of the company, because he had an ex-wife who was, fighting him for alimony, and she was very successful and rich, but she was very greedy, and she wanted to take his money, and it was safer for him to, name the pair as directors of the company, so their names would be on more of the documents of the company, and his money would be safe from his greedy ex-wife. Kinda shady. You just met these people and you're making them directors of your company. It's a little weird. So, Elaine's job was to travel to Europe and look at properties for David, but these properties would never sell. And she would also deposit money for David in his foreign bank accounts. All of this was a facade. The big Europe, the business, the traveling to Europe and looking at properties, there was no company. But David was so rich that he could literally fool them into thinking there was a company, and he paid the money for it, They thought they were directors of this company that was making money, so that's how they were making the money, but it was all a facade. So David was known for being very religious. He was a regular at the church, and the priest said that he seemed very nice and supportive, and he was kind to everyone. So, religious people are usually very truthful, like more trustable, I feel like, because they have more morals. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'm making sense, but yeah, so for this reason, the couple trusted David heavily, very easily too. So Elaine and Ron Platt were invited to David Davis's house for Christmas Day 1992 with David Davis's daughter, Noelle. Now, pay attention to this detail because I will come back to it, and it is a very important part. So David Davis's daughter, Noelle. Noelle seemed like she constantly looked to her father for approval, and she was very shy, and whenever she said something, she would look to her father and be like she would make sure she was saying the right thing. And this seemed very weird to I forgot Elaine. This was very weird to Elaine, but she just assumed, shy kid. Yeah. So on that Christmas Day, David Davis gave Elaine Boyce and Ron Platt a very generous gift. He gave them 2 tickets to Canada that were usable till the end of February 1993. This shocked Elaine because that was only a couple months later, and she hadn't planned for it, but Ron was up for it because moving to Canada was his dream. It was something that he always wanted to do. And Elaine was just shocked. Like, why would they have to go to Canada so quickly, Like, why would David want them to go to Canada so quickly? Why did he want them gone? David also told the couple that they could stay on as directors and still make money from the company, even if they moved to Canada, if they turned their signatures into stamps, so that David Davis could use these stamps to sign documents or checks, etc. So, they didn't find anything suspicious about any of this. As I said, they found David Davis to be very, trustable, everything like that, they trusted him a lot. So, in February 1993, the couple moved to Canada, but Elaine was not happy. They didn't have much money, they couldn't find work, and it was so cold because in Canada, well, it was the middle of winter and it's freezing here, But within 5 months of being in Canada, this was 1993, so, this was the year that Elaine and Ron Platt they would separate. So 5 months after of living in Canada, Elaine went back home to be a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding. And this would be, she would leave Ron and she would leave Canada and she would come back home. So at her sister's wedding, David was invited as a family friend. At this wedding, Elaine told David that she would not be returning to Canada or to Ron, and David was not happy about this, and he tried to convince her to go back, but she wouldn't listen. She didn't want to go back. Days later, David packed all of his things up, and he moved out of the area, completely cutting Elaine off, and she had no way of contacting him, which is very shady. She just told him that she left Ron, she was gonna stay, and all of a sudden, David Davis has disappeared without a trace. So around this time, it was when David Davis started posing as Ron Platt, and he continued to do this for the next 3 years. So, Elaine did not know that he was doing this, that he was using her ex-boyfriend's name, pretending to be him. She didn't know about any of this. She lost contact with both of the men. She knew that Ron moved to the UK, and not much else, till she heard that they found his dead body, but she found out about this quite late. She found out about her ex-boyfriend's death like 3 months after it happened. So, So like 3 months after Ron's body was found, Elaine contacted David Davis, and he didn't even mention Ron's dead body. So at this point, Elaine didn't know that Ron was dead. So she called, she found a way to contact David Davis, and they had a normal conversation because she didn't know what was happening, but David Davis did. He was brought in for questioning, several times by that point. So he didn't even mention it. He just told her that he had moved to France, and now, they talked about normal stuff. And later on, she found out that David Davis was keeping it from her because, she heard about how he had been investigated, and he did not bring it up to her one time. He did not bring it up to her at all. So the next time they called, Elaine was very scared to talk to him, but she told him that she knew about Ron's death, and David invited her to talk about it over coffee. And they discussed Ron's death. She said that she seemed very suspicious when the two had met. So after she left, she said that he had seemed very suspicious. So after he left, the cafe, wherever they were having coffee, Elaine called the police and told them that she had feelings that were very weird. And at this point, the police also were very suspicious about David Davis. There was all these weird stuff, he was impersonating Ron Platt, and he had a boat, and so they set up police at the station that David was supposed to arrive home at. But that night, David Davis did not come home. David Davis did not come home that night. So he did not stop at the station that they thought he would stop at, which was very weird. So the next day they drove past Little London Farmhouse, I forgot. And they looked for signs of life. They were looking for David Davis, and the cops planned to arrest David with armed forces. But David had very different plans that day. He just got into a taxi, and they were driving, and he was talking to the taxi driver. They were just having a regular chat, when the police cars pulled up to the side of the taxi, and there was several police cars, and they were armed. And they pulled up to the taxi side, and a police officer goes up to the window, and he holds a gun at Davis, and they arrested him on suspicion of murder. And David Davis was completely chill about it. He was fine with it. He seemed very relaxed. So David Davis was searched at the station. In one pocket, he was found to have ID for David Davis, and in the other pocket, he was found to have ID for Ron Platt. but it said Ron Platt's name, but it had his picture. So now they knew that David Davis was impersonating Ron Platt, but they did not have enough information to convict him for the murder. So they dig deeper into David Davis's past to find that they have stumbled upon an international criminal on a most wanted list. So it was after his arrest that they found most of their evidence against David Davis. So before they arrested him, they didn't have much information. They could only arrest him on suspicion of murder. And it was after they arrested him that they did most of their evidence finding. They found most of their evidence. So they drove to David Davis's house, and they arrested the woman they thought was his wife. So she was very young. She seemed very young, less than half of his age. And David Davis and her also had a young child at that time. She was concerned for her child, so she packed her child a baby bag, like some stuff that her kids could need while she was off on arrest. So she packed them a bag before they all left, but when one of the police officers picked up the baby bag, they found it was very heavy, for just one night baby stuff. But this was a very dumb part on the wife of David Davis. This bag was heavy. They searched it and they found gold bars in the bag, and they also found I think they found 3 solid gold bars in the bag, and they also found about 20,000 pounds in cash, I'm pretty sure. Somewhere around there. So on October 31st, 1996, they searched Little London Farmhouse. I'm going to insert a clip from the documentary here, and I will also leave a link to the documentary down below if anybody wants to check that out. So they found 25,000 pounds in cash, 8,000 Swiss francs, 17 gold bars and paintings valued at 6,000 pounds, documents, valuables, and paintings. Everything was taken by investigators, but they also found a picture of David Davis on a yacht called Lady Jane with him on board. One of the inspectors was a sailor, so he knew the exact location of the yacht, so they went to where the yacht was. Now, let's talk about the yacht a little bit. So on the yacht, they found traces of Ron Platt's hair and blood on the pillows and stuff inside the boat, and an empty carrier bag from a shop called Sport Nautique. So they visited the shop, and they found that in the records they had recently sold an anchor. An anchor had been bought from the shop, and they were curious to know if this was the same anchor the fishermen had pulled in on their net with Ron Platt's body. So pathologists took a closer look at the anchor, and they realized that these anchors were bought from the same shop. And and the anchors, they looked at the different styles, they matched the gash on Ron Platt's head. So, and there was also a weird kink on Ron Platt's body when they found him on his belt. The leather belt that he was wearing had traces of zinc on it, which matched the coating on the anchor. So the theory was that Ron Platt had been hit in the head, and he became unconscious, and then somebody had attached the anchor to his belt and threw Ron Platt's body into the sea, and that is how Ron Platt was killed. All this evidence was still not enough to convict David Davis. So they decided to dig in a little bit more. And this is where everything kind of gets a little insane, as if it wasn't insane enough. This is where we learn about David Davis's criminal past. So they wanted more information, so they took David Davis's fingerprints and they sent it to Interpol because they thought that David Davis was American. A few hours later, they learned that David Davis was not his actual name. So, to catch you up a little bit, this is David Davis. He is convicted on suspicion of murder. He pretended to be Ron Platt for 3 years, a man who was found dead. And they convicted him and found out that his real name is not even David Davis. David Davis was yet another identity he had stolen. The actual name of this man that they had in custody, his actual 100% real name, real identity, was actually Albert Johnson Walker. 3 identities. So, now I'm going to start referring David Davis as Albert Walker, because that is his original name. So I'll be transitioning from David Davis to Albert Walker, just to make sure nobody is confused. So, Albert Walker, previously known as David Davis, was a fugitive in Canada, and he was wanted for the theft of millions and millions of dollars. And he was on Interpol's most wanted list. So, Albert Walker had been living in Ontario with his first wife, Barb, and their family. So him and his wife, Barb, had children together. But the couple had split up after a while, and he was arrested trying to break into the family home. A couple months later, Albert Walker, who ran an investment company, disappeared with $3.2 million of clients' money. So, he decided he escaped Canada with his daughter, Sheena. His family thought that they were going on a vacation together, but him and his daughter never returned. And this is very important. Please remember this part. I think you will get what I mean, but you'll get it later on. Remember that he escaped with his 15-year-old daughter, Sheena. 15-year-old daughter. Barb Walker was very worried for her daughter, who had suddenly disappeared with her criminal father. So no one could figure out where Albert Walker had gone. And that was when he assumed his first fake identity as David Davis, a man who was an investor in his company. So he took on the identity of one of his investors. So the theory was that he used David Davis's identity to get out of Canada and be safe in England with his daughter. But that identity had run its course, and he needed a new identity. That was when he ran into Ron Platt and Elaine in 1991, and they became friends. And he made them directors in his company, and he paid for them to leave Canada. So, that's why he wanted them to leave so quickly, because he wanted to steal Ron Platt's identity. He moved them so that he could take the identity. Then he moved 30 miles south with a new identity and a new wife. And the two found a cottage to live in. Well, not a new wife, but he also got his wife a new identity. So the two found a cottage to live in, and his wife, who was much younger than him, like less than half his age, wink wink, was very pregnant at that time. The owners of the cottage said that he was a very sweet man, but his wife seemed to be much younger than him, So for the next year, they lived in the cottage, but the owners heard his wife call him Daddy. And they assumed that maybe it was a term of affection, but they thought it was actually weird. And they were shocked to find out later on that this woman that was much younger than him was never actually his wife. It was his daughter, Sheila, who he had escaped Canada with when she was 15. And she was pregnant at the time, and they had one child together already, and she was very pregnant, and she was due to give birth soon, so this was where the incest... She already had one child, so that is really messed up, man. That is so messed up. And just like Elaine had described her as quiet and she looked to her father for approval, many people that knew them in this new area in the cottage, they described his wife as his wife slash daughter as very shy or quiet, and she didn't speak much, and she looked to her father slash husband for approval and everything. And it was very weird. So by the end of 1994, he moved to another area, and this area was where he would be caught. But before being caught, the family lived there for about 2 years. In 1995, he heard news from Canada that the real Ronald Platt was leaving Canada and moving to the UK. So, this was the time, like around the time that this was around, well, okay, this was after Elaine had left Canada, and she left Ron Platt, so Ron Platt left Canada as well, and he moved to the UK, very close to the area where Albert Walker moved and assumed his third identity as Ron Platt. So Albert Walker took Ron Platt's identity, shipped Ron Platt off to Canada, and now Ron Platt was back very close to his area. Now people would notice that there were two Ron Platts living very close to one another, and there was a very likely chance that he would be caught and people would know that he was not Ron Platt, and he was actually Albert Walker, a international criminal. So yeah, so he invited Ron Platt out on a walk as a friend, and they went fishing, and he killed him right there and then. That was the theory. Like, Ron Platt trusted him so much, he took Ron Platt on the boat, and that was when he killed him. Hit him in the head with an anchor, and tied the anchor to his belt and tossed Ron Platt into the sea. And that is how, unfortunately, Ron Platt's life was taken by this horrible, horrible man. So now let's talk about his sentencing a little bit. In June 1998, Albert Walker walked into court for the murder of Ronald Platt. He walked in confidently, thinking that he was going to walk free, but this was not the case. His daughter slash wife was a key witness in his sentencing. She had been on the run with her father for 6 years, posing as his wife, and now the mother of 2 small children. And everyone, thought that she might have been brainwashed by her father into protecting him, but she said that on the day that Ron Platt was murdered, her father had taken the boat out and had come home very late, and he was drenched in water. Elaine also took the stand to explain their background and why Albert would have motive for the murder, and it took and there's also a lot of evidence on this guy, It took the jury less than 2 hours to find him guilty of Ron Platt's murder, and he is now sentenced to life in imprisonment. But yeah, that's it. That was the case. I tried to talk a little bit quicker because I didn't want this to be too long, because my last one was like 40 minutes and nobody watched that one. And I hope you guys are okay with the soft spoken, because whispering like this takes a lot of my breath, and it's very exhausting. But speaking softly is much more preferable. So this case was insane to me. I couldn't stop thinking about this case. I literally could not sleep because, that's the case. I don't want to make this video too long. So thank you for listening, and I hope you have an excellent day, evening, or night, depending on when you are watching this. I wish you the best in quarantine. Yeah.